親父は腹に数発食らったみたいで。
どこかの組の会士か？
いえ、多分土地買収の絡みです。事務所から例の土地の権利書がなくなってました。
何？
絶対玉城組の連中に決まってる。奴ら1年前のことで俺たちを逆恨みして。
いや、それがどうも違うみたいで。
ん？どうしたんださっき？
誰ですか？
これはこいつが撃ったのか？
これって。
兄貴、こいつ兄貴が知ってる人なんすか？
ああ、俺の死んだ親父、風間のおやっさんだ。
Yakuza 3 is the third main installment in the Yakuza series. The game was developed and published by Sega. It was released solely on the PlayStation 3. Yakuza 3 was originally released on February 26, 2009 in Japan, and then on March 9, 2010 in North America. Yakuza 3 begins right after Yakuza 2 with you as Kazuma Kiryu, the fourth chairman of the Tojo clan, paying your respects and saying farewell to all of your allies in Kamurocho, the setting of Yakuza 1 and 2. Just as a side note, a chairman is the equivalent of the big boss or Don. Kiryu has decided to leave the life of a Yakuza behind to move to Okinawa, where he will manage the Sunshine Orphanage and take care of 8 children as well as his adopted daughter. Himself being raised in a similar orphanage, he volunteered to take the job and raise the children with proper care. Not too long after a calm life beside the Okinawa beach, the Ryoto family, a local gang in the area, begin to post eviction notices and stake out the orphanage. Kazuma Kiryu confronts Nakahara, the landlord of the orphanage, and the leader of the Ryoto family. In this confrontation and a surprise visit from the 6th and current chairman of the Tojo clan, Kazuma Kiryu learns that the government wants to buy all the land in the area, which includes the orphanage, to build a resort and a military base that will in turn stimulate the Okinawa economy. The current chairman of the Tojo clan finds out that Kazuma Kiryu has an orphanage on the land they intend to take, so he halts the entire process by taking the entire Tojo clan out of the equation. The problem with this, however, is that the government covertly hired the Tojo clan to take the land they couldn't legally buy. So with the Tojo clan out of the picture, both the resort and the military base cannot be built on the land the government does not own. In turn, the current chairman of the Tojo clan, Daigo Dojima, and the leader of the Ryoto family are shot and the deed to the orphanage is stolen. With the deed stolen, the fate of the orphanage is up in the air. With the current chairman of the Tojo clan, Daigo Dojima, in the hospital, the fate of the Tojo clan is up in the air. Now it's up to you, Kazuma Kiryu, to don your classic suit and save the Tojo clan and his orphanage. Like all of the games in the series, the story of Yakuza 3 is a rather complicated one, and even more difficult to write about. I mean, most Yakuza games, like Yakuza 3, are comparable to daytime soap operas or novelas, in which there can be last-minute reveals and last-minute deaths that make sense but have a feeling of just over-the-top drama to them.
そんなことされたら俺の顔が潰れちまう。
じゃあどうすればいい？
どうしても生きてえってなら俺を倒してからにしゃ。
ほう、そんなことでいいのか。
なめた口聞いてんじゃねえぞ、おっさん。てめえ、頭に本当に勝てると思ってんのか。
頭？
そうだ。兄貴は天下の流動一家の若頭、捨て頃のハブこと島袋力也さんだ。それでもやるって言うのか、おっさ
ん。やめとけ。
あ？
お前、自分の顔潰したくないんだろ？
そんなこと言ってやめようとしてんじゃねえよ、腰抜けのおっさん。
沖縄じゃどれだけ有名か知らねえが、そんな脅しが通るほど世の中甘くねえぜ。
持ってろ。 どうだ。
なかなか立派な蛇だな。
違うわボケ。ヘビじゃねえよ、ハブ。ハブだハブ。捨て頃のハブっつってんだろ。
ハブも蛇も同じだろ。
違うわ。ハブは沖縄の魂だ。俺は沖縄の心背負ってんだよ。
相当地元のことを好きなんだな。
そうよ。内地のあんたに本物の沖縄もんの強さを教えてやるぜ。ミキオ、てめえは絶対に手出すな。
あ、はい。
覚悟はいいな。
I mean, it's very much like, the reason I know you so well is because I was your half brother all along. That being said, I can't say too much about the story because part of the storytelling in Yakuza 3 is all the reveals towards the end, and it would count as spoilers. Most of the game I found quite dull in that you were doing more for the people of Okinawa and his orphanage more than anything else. It was until the final stretch when the overall plot kicked into gear. I mean, if anything, 2/3 of the game was character development while 1/3 was the actual plot. In one way, it's a great way to develop the characters. In this game, Kazuma Kiryu decides to leave the life, so it only makes sense that he uses his physical strength to help people from getting cheated in Okinawa and running errands for his children. You do countless favors for people, but while they are meaningless tasks, it builds up the characters. Kazuma Kiryu is always described as a Yakuza god and being a legend in the underworld, and it's constantly mentioned, but it was at odds with what I was experiencing, running to get cool clothes for one of the orphans, helping out some local vendor buying back a fish he sold to the wrong person. I mean, I bought ingredients for a bitter melon drink. Wow! What a legend. However, this is the point. He left the life, he beats up scam artists, he helps the local people, he does favors for his children. It builds him up as a great father figure, and it works. The problem is that you don't see it until the end. As I was playing, I couldn't help but keep checking the box of the game just to make sure I was playing a Yakuza game. After initially confronting the Ryoto family of Okinawa, Kiryu eventually becomes close with all of them, especially a lieutenant called Rikiya. Rikiya being a Yakuza in Okinawa and knowing that Kiryu was a Yakuza from Tokyo, Rikiya falls for Kiryu and stays by him, even following him back to Kamurocho after Kiryu tells him to stay home. In Kamurocho, you can take Rikiya sightseeing and you can learn more about Kiryu and Rikiya, and again, it's building up a character that you don't really care about until the very end. If anything, that's the biggest downfall of the game. The story doesn't kick in until the end, and therefore, unless you're a big fan of the series and its characters, it is difficult to stay attached to the story. It's as if you were eating a hot dog that wasn't good, but you knew that for some reason, that last bite of that hot dog is orgasmic. If you already don't like hot dogs, you're not going to go for it, even knowing that the last bite might be worthwhile. The gameplay, on the other hand, is pretty solid for it being the first in the series to hit the next gen. The first two were on the PS2, so for the first in the series to be on the PS3, it's definitely not bad. The controls, for the most part, are pretty responsive, and I never had much trouble beating up the Yakuza, Street Punks, and the like. The core of Yakuza 3 is beating people up. There's nothing to it. Someone confronts you, or you confront them, and then there's a fight. As you complete main quests, side quests, or even collectibles, your range of attacks gets larger and larger, and by the end of the game, you have a variety of possible attacks that you can use. You can start the game with punch, punch, kick, and then a heat move where you just stomp on someone, but by the end of the game, you'll have an impressive 4-punch, 2-kick combo with a heat move where you essentially become the Flash and you can attack 4 people at once. Much like in Mafia 3, where executions are the highlight of the combat, in Yakuza 3, heat moves are the highlight of any fight you get into. The combat is also incredibly easy to just jump into. This is a third-person action adventure game with RPG elements. This is not a technical fighting game where one needs to use about 3 hands to achieve a finisher. The game tells you exactly how to use heat moves, and all the player has to do is fill up the heat meter, which is done through basic attacks. There's nothing to it. Throughout the game, you can learn additional heat moves through revelations. Now, revelations are moments where Kiryu takes out his cell phone and snaps photos of certain events that then lead to the learning of a new move. These events add humor to the overall tone of the game and are always fun to take part in. The world of Yakuza 3 is also filled to the absolute brim with side quests and activities. I thought I did more than enough, but in the end I only completed the game at a whopping and disappointing 18%. You can go drinking and eating, which also serve as ways to refill your health and give you experience. If you go drinking, the bartender will give insane details about your drink. I actually found one of my favorite whiskeys in the game and I learned a thing or two about it. You can go out to eat food or dessert, and each restaurant is realistic and serve their own menu. There are collectibles in Yakuza 3 to my dismay, but at the very least, in Yakuza 3 the collectibles are locker keys, in which you can open lockers with health, heat items, and many other valuables that you can sell or even use to craft weapons. The side quests can range from taking Rikia to go sightseeing or to stopping people from scamming the locals with lucky coral necklaces. You can visit stores like Don Quixote, which is real, I might add, and buy equipment and other items. Fighting enemies on the street rewards you with money, experience, equipment. It's astounding that everything you encounter in Yakuza 3 has a use in some shape or form. The maps of the two cities you are in are also big enough to fit all this extra content in, but small enough where it can take you about a minute to get from one end of the map to the other, so it's hardly ever an annoyance traversing the area. So there's never really a time in Yakuza 3 where you are left with nothing to do, and that adds to the overall gameplay. The only negative aspect to the overall gameplay is the chase sequences, but this is more affected by the visuals than the controllers. Now the visuals of Yakuza 3 are good. Other games that released in 2009 include Saints Row 2, Assassin's Creed 2, and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. So considering the game originally released in 2009, albeit in Japan only, they're good, but nothing spectacular. If anything, the environments look incredible. It's the characters that seem a little iffy from time to time. The NPCs are basic enemy character models and repeatedly used without discrimination. You probably have seen them all within 20 minutes of gameplay, if that. They have these weird faded faces without features, which make all the main characters stand out so much more. I would assume this is the case to save space and essentially focus more on content, quality rather than quantity. Whenever a fight is initiated, the civilians around you create the ring you fight in. They stand around the fight area and you can't move past them. They create this invisible wall. However, this has to be done by the time the fight introduction is over. So it's common to see civilians that are right next to you just vanish into thin air, or see civilians pop into existence where the invisible wall should be. This very thing becomes a problem during chase sequences, because in chase sequences where Kiryu has to catch an enemy, the two have limited stamina, and running into people will diminish stamina. As you run towards the enemy, sometimes depending on the area, civilians will pop into existence, giving you no chance to avoid them, thus making the sequence a lot more difficult than it should be. However, given that problem, I was never truly bothered by people disappearing and reappearing in and out of reality. Yakuza 3 never takes itself that seriously, and therefore I reflected that attitude with that in mind. I understood what they were going for, and I left it at that. Some people might find the cutscene and dialogue scenes a little jarring, and where sometimes there's a fully fledged cutscene and then there's a scene where there's no audio but only dialogue boxes, but that goes away with time. I assume that was just merely budget issues and an easy way to get to understand the game a little bit more. You can animate the emotional scenes and then make the scenes where there's a lot of information being thrown at the player into dialogue text scenes, where the player can just read it at their own pace. As for the visual technical issues, I found very little. The loading and frame rate issues were that of the time the game was released. They're minimal and they never interfered with my gameplay experience. As for the audio part of the game sounds great. The sounds of the city are realistic and the voice acting is well done. With the exception of certain dialogue, text cutscenes where the character's on the phone and it just looks like they're chewing on a massive stick of gum, I didn't notice any poor synchronization in the cutscenes where it mattered. The music was decent. There's no music that comes to mind in retrospect, except for the fact that the music adapted to where you were. You could be listening to soft jazz at a bar and then listening to some techno fusion while you're fighting out in the streets, but besides that, the music isn't something to applaud. It's there for ambiance and nothing else. In terms of voice acting specifically, the only character I had some trouble with was the one American man in the whole game. His voice acting sounded off and somewhat cartoonish, which is totally noticeable when you have professional Japanese voice actors giving their heart and soul into their emotional performances in cutscenes.
お前がな、本当の母親のとこに行っちゃったんじゃないかと思って、すごく寂しがっていたんだ。お前は中原と母親、どっちと一緒にいたいんだ。
何が娘よ、何が母親よ、バッカじゃないのあんたたち。
何？
私はね、この子のせいで人生めちゃくちゃになったのよ。生まれた時からいっつも邪魔だった。
このアマ、王将の前でなんてこと。
うるさい。
There was one point in the game where the American yells and it was just hilariously bad.
If I'd known it would have come to this, I'd have killed you when first we met.
そうか。屋上に行くにはあんたを倒してからにしろと。
You're welcome to try. This is the end of the line for you, Kazuma Kiryu.
If I could summarize his voice acting, it would be generic American male. In summation, the game isn't something that I would urge people to play. If a Yakuza game interests you, I would also not recommend this installment. There's no question this is a Yakuza game. I played this game after playing Yakuza 4 and 5 and I never doubted that. The same creativity and soul I felt in Yakuza 4 and 5, I felt in playing in 3. But my biggest problem is just that the story takes too long to come together. However, in saying that, I'm also divided because if it wasn't for the long, boring character development, I wouldn't have cared so much about everyone when it came to the final stretch. The gameplay is fun, and there's enough to keep you entertained in the world of Yakuza 3. Once you beat the game, there are also other game modes that are unlocked, so the gameplay is extended through what is essentially New Game Plus and Free Roam. If you're interested in a Yakuza game, Yakuza 3 is something I would not recommend immediately unless extremely slow characterization is something you enjoy. If you're interested in a Yakuza game, Yakuza 3 is something I would not recommend unless extremely slow characterization is something you enjoy. If you've played other installments, this game is a 50-50 for me in terms of recommendation, because while it does tell another story of Kazuma Kiryu, it's a standalone story that doesn't seem to matter in 4 and 5, with the exception of one plot point in Yakuza 4, and it's actually explained in Yakuza 4. It's literally just a story that I would not want to play again. But I mean, otherwise, it's a fine game. All that being said, I'd have to give Yakuza 3 a 7.5 out of 10.
なんだ。
あんたもしかしてあの登場界の4代目ってわけじゃねえよな。
それがどうした？
嘘だろ？4代目っつったらよ、こっちの人間でも知ってるぜ。確か堂島のりってあんたひょっとして桐生？
まあ今度から喧嘩を売るときはちゃんと相手のことを調べてからにするんだな、兄弟。
なんかとんでもねえやつと杯交わしちまったぜ。
まあそんなこともあるさ。
くー